Hi, I'm Giles Martin. I'm here in Abbey Road Studio 2. I was actually born in 1969 on John Lennon's birthday, which fascinated him. He said to my dad, "No, you're not sort of arsehole he's going to turn out to be." It's funny, growing up as a kid, having a father like George Martin, you can't compare it to anything else. I've never actually swapped dads with anyone. But we didn't necessarily, myself and my sister didn't necessarily grow up in a terribly musical house, apart from, as a kid, I noticed my dad played the piano a lot, and odd people would come back and forth. In fact, when I was a playgroup, they went around the class, and I was about 4 or 5, and they said, what do your parents do for a living? And they, my dad's an accountant, my dad's a lawyer, my dad's a truck driver, whatever. And I said, my dad just sits at home and plays the piano. And it turns out he was writing, I think he was writing the music for Live and Let Die, the film at the time. And there's huge embarrassment amongst my parents. They go, he's not employed, he's got a proper job. And so it wasn't a sort of thing. I think growing up I didn't necessarily grow up in a musical household. It wasn't, I had the privilege of meeting people like Paul McCartney at an early age and meeting, the Beatles at an early age, but they were just friends of my parents. It didn't mean a whole lot to me as a kid. I remember when I became interested in the guitar and became interested in songwriting, Paul did say to me, he was incredibly encouraging. He goes, "That's great, I find it difficult to write songs, and I'm Paul McCartney." So I did have a privileged sort of background as far as that goes. My parents were always very wary of me getting a proper job. I learned to play the guitar, as some people might be able to see, quite badly. But behind my parents' back, it was a thing, don't join the music industry. I'm delighted I did. In fact, I really got involved in music because my dad started to lose his hearing when I was about 16, and he needed a second pair of ears, and he didn't really want to tell people he was losing his hearing, so I became his ears to a certain extent. I'd come in and try and help him. Through that, I would learn off him, and we started working together. And it was actually a great thing because I was needed to a certain extent by him, which is nice as a son and a father working together. At the same time, he was always very good. He never had a sort of "that's my boy" kind of attitude. He was always very receptive to my ideas. And in fact, he's been receptive to people's ideas throughout the whole of his career. And he treated me no differently and was always open to my suggestions, however wrong they may be. And God knows I made lots of wrong ones. So it gave me a chance to learn, and gave me a chance to respect him for what he does and what he's done. I never I was never any good at learning songs off by heart. I mean, I bluffed my way through most things. I've never been terribly accurate at playing anything. I can play a number of things very badly, but I was much more interested in playing for a reason. So as soon as I learned to play the guitar with a friend of mine, we started playing in the underground here, started playing in tube stations. Playing whatever songs we could learn, basically, as you do. And my dad was especially distraught by this. He didn't want, George Martin's son being arrested because it's illegal. At that stage, it was illegal to busk. In fact, the way we played it should have been illegal, but it was illegal to busk. And I then got into playing bands. I formed a band, as you do, and I had a great time. I think playing in a band, learning to play an instrument, learning to play a guitar was the best thing I ever did. And not that I practice the guitar or play it very often now, but it opens so many doors as far as if you're willing to play it to people, if you're willing to bore people with it. It's great, to meet people and chat. It's like a great hobby to have. It's better than video games, for instance. And I think that being in a band taught me more about recording and music, fun enough, than being the son of George Martin did. Because if you're the son of someone, people expect you have this knowledge, which generally you don't have. People think you grew up in recording studios. Of course, I'd spent more time in studios than probably other people are 16, but it's still just a row of buttons. If you're 16, it's still just, a compressor. Of course, I know what a compressor does. I hadn't got a clue for a long time because people expect you to know these things. But if you're in a band, especially as I was in an unsuccessful band, you have a chance to make a whole lot of mistakes and learn stuff. And the hardest thing, not that it's a bad thing, but the hardest thing if you're a son of someone famous or a child of a famous person is you don't get that many chances to make mistakes before people go. People are hoping for the second coming. People are going, he's going to be just like his dad. And if you screw up, you're then the other way. He couldn't get a proper job. And so being in a sort of hidden band gave me a chance to learn. And that's what, music is about evolving. It's about discovering new stuff. It's about learning new songs. It's about learning how things work. It's not about playing the same old things every day, then things become boring. After playing in a band, I carried on playing I always played with people, always like going on tour and playing in pubs and clubs. So I thought it was just great fun. And I started writing jingles, I started writing commercials. I started doing gasoline adverts. That was for France. French gasoline was the peak of my life. And that was when I was at university. And then when I left university, I wanted to become a record producer. I wanted to write music for people and produce people, but I couldn't. I didn't have any, what do? You can't go, I'm the son of George Martin, let me produce you, or give me a job. And so I ended up working in press. And at the same time, I started looking at bands. And funny enough, my dad was he was nervous, I think, of me following in his footsteps at this stage. And I saw a band called My Life Story. They're playing My Life Story. They're playing at the Astoria in London. And I went to go see them play, and I thought they were good. And they had a whole lot of strings, and I did an arrangement of them and produced them. And they released a single that became sort of #1 in Melody Maker and Enemy and the Cool magazines. And someone showed it to my dad and said, look what your son's been up to. And I was just doing it in the evenings, as you do if you're a fan of music and you want to get into music. And that kind of opened doors for me. I left the press job and became a producer. Production engineering is something that you learn stuff all the time with, like any sort of music. I mean, I think for me, starting out and how I am now, if I can work in any form of music, I'm happy. It doesn't matter. It's just, I think I produce more stuff now and remix and mix stuff now, probably because in a way it's what people expect of me, and maybe I'm okay at it. The Love project came from the fact that they needed to do a show. It was George Harrison and Guy Liberté, who's the head of Cirque du Soleil, were friends. And they decided to do a show, and they decided they couldn't have anyone singing Beatles songs a la Mamma Mia. They didn't want, a chorus singing Hey Jude on stage. And I think that's the right decision. And so they approached my dad, and I'd just had quite a lot of success in the UK doing classical stuff at the time. And Apple came to see me, and I sat with my dad and talked to them about it. And I said to them, I could try creating a gig that never happened. And Neil Aspinall, who was the head of Apple, said, I'd love, we talked about, because he was their roadie, we talked about their shows. We talked about, starting off with Long Tall Sally and finishing with Twist and Shout, or, creating the thing. And I said, well, listen, with Pro Tools and digital stuff, I can perhaps create a gig that never happened. So, under complete secrecy, I went upstairs here into a very small room and took some material, and I took at the beginning, the drums from the end, and Get Back, because I realized they're the same tempo, and because I thought I'd start a gig, never happened, with a drum solo going into a song, and started moving things around, and people said mashing up. I always thought it was a bit rude. And then thought, how am I going to start this? And got the piano from A Day in the Life and turned that backwards, because I thought if that makes a good ending, it'll make a good beginning as it sucks into the chord from Hard Day's Night. I just had fun, And my view was, if I can impress my dad doing Beatles stuff, then that's pretty good. As a son, you're always trying to impress your dad, I think, or compete in some way. And it just so happened that it was on Beatles stuff, and I was auditioning for the Beatles. And I really thought that they probably wouldn't like it. I really thought people would think this is a really bad idea. It sounds like a bad idea if you just talk about it. And I then took Within You, Without You and Tomorrow Never Knows and stuck those together, because I thought this will definitely get me fired, if nothing else. And they came and they really liked it. They liked the ideas. And so I ended up becoming the sort of legacy which I kind of fought against for a long time. And here I am now in Abbey Road talking about it. Suddenly became part of it, and I backed up all the catalogue onto Pro Tools and started working on this project, which became Love. I came with my dog Stan and went to my room and started working. We had a list. I worked with the director of the show and my dad. My dad would come in 2 days a week, and I'd play him ideas and we'd work through stuff. So he was kind of producing me doing it. But the bosses were the Beatles, Ringo and Paul, and Olivia Harrison and Yoko Ono, who were representing George and John. And it was important that they liked everything. They had to hear everything before it was passed on anywhere else. And the interesting thing about the Beatles, it's such a protected circle, rightfully so, that if you do something and no one likes it, no one ever hears it. You know, and that's actually quite a good thing for me, because it means I could take risks. You know, occasionally people at Abbey Road were sort of, you know, people who hadn't heard anything, which the majority of people here, didn't like the idea of what we were doing, and didn't like the idea of me coming in and changing. People think it's changing history, but it's not, because I'm not deleting anything. I wasn't, you know, I was just really trying to do something different. And Ringo and Paul would come in. The funny thing is they come and listen to stuff, and they're not allowed to take stuff away either. It's not like you give them a CD. The only chance of them listening to the new mixes we were doing was by coming here and listening to them. And then later, as we got the technology sorted out and secure drives were done, I would go and see Yoko and sit down with her and work through stuff. And it's fascinating. For me, it was fascinating because I have no past with them. You know, I certainly wasn't there at the time. And so it's kind of on an even, I'm way down the pecking order, but it's kind of, I meet on an even keel, as it were. There's no history. I have no, you know, experience of anything they did. So it was quite easy for me just to go, do you like it, or what don't you like about it? And they were very proactive in it, all four of them, you know, the two wives and Ringo and Paul. You know, Paul was the one that would give me the fear, because he's such a good musician. I mean, Ringo's a pretty good musician as well, and they'd you know, they know their stuff and they know their own material. And occasionally, in fact, when we were doing the show, I sat down with Paul and I went through each bit and, you know, played in bits in the theatre, and it was great. It was a great evening. And he goes, you know, he said to me, you know, I'd have to say I really like what you've done, and what you've done has been sympathetic with my music, and I really appreciate that. For me, that was just, you know, the best. But when it came to the opening of the show, at the very beginning, when people walk into the theatre and they're sitting down, I couldn't work out because they wanted Beatle music to play, and someone said, well, why don't you just do another 60 minutes of, and I mean, it took me 2 years to do the 90 minutes. So I decided to get as many Beatles on as I could by taking the vocals off, which is difficult with Beatles stuff because there's so much leakage on the tracks, and just play the backing tracks. So it's like the Beatles are playing, they're backing as you walk in. So you have Dear Prudence with no vocal, you know, you have Should Have Known Better with no vocal, and Penny Lane with no vocal. And the idea was that it would counterpoint Because. When Because starts, it's just vocals. So I'm sitting with Paul, and my dad's there and Paul's there, and Penny Lane's playing in the ceiling of the theatre. And Paul goes, and what's this then? And I went, it's Penny Lane. He goes, I know it's bloody Penny Lane, but what's it doing in the ceiling? And I said, well, I just thought it'd be an idea to, you know, because they listened to everything. I thought it'd be an idea to maybe put the backing tracks up there. And he's like, oh, okay, you know, I'll have a listen. And it's right there, because it is their music. And, you know, and my dad sometimes, you know, he feels embarrassed because it's not his music, and it certainly isn't mine. It is theirs. There were 4 Beatles, and it was their band, and that was it. There's no 5th Beatle. With music, there's things you'd like to do. I wish I could play things better. You know, I've always thought, you know, it'd be great to really learn how to play the bass properly, or guitar properly, or piano properly. You know, but it's just a question of time. Maybe I'll start watching our video tunes and then become a better musician. But you know, I'd like to, you know, work with, you know, a really good young band. At the same time, I'd love to go and do something like the Love Project with something else, you know, with taking stuff and creating, make people listen to music again. The good thing about Love is people do analyze it, people do listen, and people don't have it on the background, they do actually get into it. And that's why we do music. We do music because we're passionate about it. And so, really, I mean, I'm about to write a television thing, you know, it's a question of writing, producing, and being creative. And anything that lets you do that, you take. And every day, I just can't believe I can do this for a living. You know, I was told by my parents for years it's an impossible job to do for a living, despite coming from my background, because I think maybe when I have kids, I'll be doing the same thing. You know, don't go into music. You know, but you do it because you love it, and if you can get paid for it, it means you don't have to do another job to get in the way as well. So it's fantastic. I would say to anyone learning an instrument, anyone, you know, struggling, because let's face it, we all struggle with instruments all the time, and we struggle with music. is that no matter how hard it is, it's hard for everyone. And that love that you have for it, never let go of it, because you might be trying to learn a song and go, I'm never going to learn this. But the fact of it is, you do learn, and you do move on. And the thing to do is never ever give up, never ever lose that drive and that feeling you get when you work something out or you hear some great music, because it's much better than sitting down and watching the telly. I mean, the thing about music is that I think if anyone's toured, I used to tour a lot. You end up kind of working on automatic pilot, and you start amusing yourself with stuff. I was playing bass in a band, and you start playing the same things over and over again. And I was once in Germany, and I used to jump off the stage, and I jumped off the stage, and I had no idea until I left the how far I was jumping. We played the end of the concert, and I jumped off the stage, and there was no crowd there. I mean, let's face it, we weren't that popular, but there was a break before the people. And I launched off the stage, and seeing the band's faces, and they looked at me, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die in a shit club in Germany. And I dropped about 12 feet. My bass amp almost followed me, because I didn't have wireless or anything. The bass, it was like Wile E. Coyote. My lead unraveled. It was the only thing that kept me alive. And an Ampeg SV200 or they came crashing down afterwards. But yeah, I spent most of my time being laughed at by people. I think it's important. I think it's important in studios to have a good laugh. It's funny, I mean, it's the Beatles. It's one thing that was shocking for me from listening to all of the tapes, everything they did, was not how serious it was. It was how much kind of fun there is in the tapes. Even when you think, oh, the White Album they didn't get on, they're really cracking up most of the time. And it's kind of, you forget that actually they came to the studio to have a good time, and all the other stuff you read about happened in offices and accountants and all that sort of stuff. Most of the studio stuff is great. And that's the thing about music. Music should be fun. If you're learning music, have a laugh with it, and don't sit on your own and do it. Find someone to play with, because the great thing about music is there's always someone worse than you. I mean, in my case, you really have to hunt them out, but there is, and so show off to someone. Well, the great thing about the internet is the fact you can delve into the world of songs and work out chords. And one of the problems I struggle from is you look on the internet, and quite often the chord sheets are wrong. There's some guy going, if you know the right way this song goes, please write in. You think, oh, that's no good. I can work that out. And the great thing about iVideo tunes is it breaks down that barrier, and you're suddenly being taught by professionals. You're suddenly being taught in a simple way by professionals. It's kind of inspired me. I saw iVideo tunes before I got involved in it, and it's inspired me to going, right, I'm going to see if I can learn the piano better now. And I think that's a great thing. People don't have access to the best people in the world, and now with iVideo tunes they do. You can be taught by some of the best people, from home, and the way it's shot and the way it's done is very simple. If I can understand it, it's very simple. So I think it's a great thing. It's a great learning tool for people, and I think hopefully it'll create great musicians in the future.
Paperback Writer.
Hi, this is Giles Martin. I'm here at Abbey Road Studio 2, talking about Paperback Writer. Now, Paperback Writer was recorded on the 14th of April, 1966. And it came from a riff. It's a riff-based song. It's very much a Paul song, and John has always said that maybe he stole the riff off Day Tripper. I mean, they're fairly similar, but they're different riffs. And quite often, because Paul actually lived close to here, or he has a house close to here, just about 4 blocks away, he'd come to the studio first and try and bash out ideas. And this is probably one of those songs that came from those sessions. Now, Paperback Writer is a landmark recording for a number of reasons, but mainly because it was the first time that the English, the Brits, had managed to work out bass frequencies. Now, for years, and my dad always said this, he even went over to America a couple of times to try and work out how Americans made their records so loud. God, the Americans are so loud, we used to say. And they couldn't work out here, the cutting engineers couldn't work out here, and they couldn't work out how to get a good bass tone. Now, Paperback Writer is a 4-track, and for the first time in Beatles recording history, the bass is just on 1 track on its own. And it's also the first time that Paul played a Rickenbacker bass, which was his longer scale than the Hofner, and it has more of a cut to it. And they set up his amp in this room in here, and recorded the amp using another speaker. They put a speaker facing the amp like that, and then plug the speaker into an amplifier, and recorded the bass like that, which means it had a sort of a loud cutting bass tone. It was actually the loudest bass up until then on Beatles records. And funny enough, on the same day, the same session as Paperback Writer, Rain was recorded, a B-side, which is famous for its bass line. So that's how that came about. Now the main riff of the song, the main guitar riff you hear, is probably Paul playing. George is probably playing rhythm. John's probably playing shaker, and Ringo's playing drums, because they're all on 1 track. So you have 1 track of what's called the rhythm track: guitar, rhythm guitar, drums, and shaker. Bass just on its own, and then the fabulous harmonies. Now you've got 3-part harmonies going on. The chords are marked out at the beginning, so they knew where to sing, but they're taken off later. And there's, in classic Beatles style, round 1 microphone, all 3 of them sang, and then they double-tracked it. So that's the 4-track. The funny thing is, because Sloop John B by the Beach Boys had just hit the charts, which was actually top of the charts in the UK at the time, there's no doubt that Paul probably stole the falsetto vocal ideas from that track. And you hear on the tapes, actually, that John and George, the idea of singing this high falsetto, they sort of found slightly funny. And there's a good chance that, singing Faire Jacques halfway through the song, which they do, may be them kind of taking the mickey slightly. But that's that it stayed on the track, and it is what it is. I think it was a #1 single. It was Paul's 3rd A-side in a row, and was #1. It's just a great track. Once they cut the track down here in Studio 2, they sent it up to the mastering room, and it had all this bass on it. And so the boffins here, and the great thing about Abbey Road Studios is there's guys who constantly trying to build things. There's a guy called Ken Townsend who was at the cutting edge of, making the tape loops of Tomorrow Never Knows, for example. And he's the guy who put the speaker in front of the bass amp, to record Paperback Writer, this song. And they built this box which they called an automatic transient control limiter or something like that, which was this huge box which they finally got to use on Paperback Writer. And it's the first time really the Brits had tried to catch up with the Americans on being as loud as possible.
This is the tone video for Paperback Writer. With the first guitar in this song, it's really important to get the notes to interact as far as the overdrive is concerned without muddying up the bottom part of the riff. And so it's really important not to crank your drive up all the way and have the treble and the bass all the way up on your amp for this. So we're really trying to get good note definition with just a little hint of that overdrive. So to get that kind of tone here on my drive channel, notice that I don't have my gains up all the way. I've just got them enough to where I'm getting a little bit of that distorted edge to it. I've got the mids more than halfway in order to get a little bit more definition out of the notes. I've also got the treble up but not cranked in order to get a little bit more definition also. And in the bass, I've got that down quite a bit in order to not get too much mud on the bottom of that riff. With the guitar two-tone, that's sort of a clean strumming sound. And so for that, notice that I've got the gain up enough to where I can get a good definition and a good kind of warble out of that sound without it breaking up a whole lot. I've got the mids cranked in order to push it through, so those are about halfway. The bass is still down quite a bit so that I don't muddy up the bottom part of the EQ. And then I've got the treble almost at 2/3 in order to put some sparkle on that tone. And that's the tone for Paperback Writer. This is the intro segment for Paperback Writer by the Beatles. This song is in the key of G in standard tuning. While it's in the key of G major, it has some blues elements, so you'll notice some F naturals here and there in the song. I'll start with the intro at speed and then slow it down. The intro is a 2-measure section that then repeats. It starts with a G on the 3rd fret of the 6th string, so play that with your first finger. And this is pretty much subdivided into 8th notes. The next 8th note will be the 3rd fret on the 5th string, so you can use the same finger to play that, just the first finger. And then on the second beat, you'll hammer on to the 5th fret on the 5th string. So that'll be a hammer on with the 3rd finger. And then use the 4th finger to fret the 5th fret on the 4th string. So that gets you through the first 2 beats of the first measure. Now, one thing to also notice is that these notes are accented very heavily. That gets them to ring out through the overdrive and resonate a little bit more clearly so they don't get too muddy down in the bass regions of the EQ. So one thing that can help with that is to do most of these attacks with a downstroke of the pick. That helps those notes to pop a little bit more. On the and of beat 3, then use the pick to go back to the 3rd fret of the 6th string again. And then on beat 4, as a quarter note, hit the 3rd fret on the 4th string. And so you'll need to let off of the 4th finger in order to do that. In the second measure, continue to have the first finger across the 3rd fret and hit the 3rd fret on the 6th string, then the 3rd fret on the 5th string. Then hit the 3rd fret on the 6th string one more time, and then we'll have a grace note hammer on from this 3rd fret on the 5th string to the 5th fret of the 5th string. And then have the first finger still barred, hit the 3rd fret on the 4th string again. So that second measure will look like this. And you do want these notes to ring together so that they can interact with that overdriven sound. So here's those 2 measures played very slowly. And that's the intro section for Paperback Writer. This is the verse segment for Paperback Writer. I'll play the verse at speed and then slow it down. The verse segment is 12 measures long, and that will then repeat. It has 2 different endings. For the first 8 measures, you'll just be writing on a G power chord, and this is a typical blues treatment of a power chord. We'll have this shape with the first finger on the 3rd fret of the 6th string and the 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 5th string. This is a normal power chord. This would be the root note of the chord, the 1, and then the 5th. And then in typical blues treatment, adding the 6th to the power chord. So for each of those 8 measures, we'll be hitting on beats 1 and 2, and then on the and of 3, hitting again, and then on 4, adding the 4th finger, and then on the and of 4, taking it off. So that'll go 1, 2, and 4 and. That'll happen for 8 measures. And then on the next two measures, take that same form, move it up to the 5th string, and now we'll be doing it in C. So this is a C power chord, the C being the 1, the G being the 5th, and then adding the 6th to that. And then on the first time through, this will end with that same intro lick. But then on the second time through, it will end with just a power chord shape. So that will look like this. And then it'll go into that a cappella section. So that'll be on the second section. So once again, the first ending will have the regular intro lick with it. And then on the second ending, I'll start with the C chord. So I've got the first finger hammering on to the 5th fret on the 5th string. So I'm hitting 3 on the 6th string, 3 on the 5th string, then hammering on to the 5th fret 5th string, and then adding the 4th finger to the 5th fret also on the 4th string. And that rings for the rest of the measure, and then going into the a cappella section. So I'll play the verse slowly at half speed. And that's the verse section.
Paperback Writer.
This is the outro segment for Paperback Writer. I'll play the outro at tempo and then slow it down. The outro section is very similar to the intro section, which repeats at various times throughout the song at the ends of the verses. The one difference is in the second measure towards the end. So I'll break this down and we'll look at how the end is played differently than the other sections of the song. At the beginning, it's similar. We've got the first finger on the 3rd fret of the 6th string, then picking the 3rd fret on the 5th string, and then hammering on to the 5th fret on the 5th string, and then using the 4th finger to fret the 5th fret on the 4th string. Then hitting the 3rd fret on the 6th string, and then the 4th string. So that's the same as in the intro. In the second measure, hitting the 3rd fret on the 6th string and then the 5th string, and then hitting it again on the 6th string, and then again on the 5th string. And this is where this differs from the intro. Let this 3rd fret ring for a quarter note on beat 3. So it'll go. And then on beat 4, have a grace note hammer on from 3, the 3rd fret on the 5th string, to 5 on the 5th string. So that second measure will sound like this. And remember, a grace note is just a note that happens slightly before the beat. So the actual note lands on the beat, and the grace note is just a fraction of a second before. So that outro will sound like this. Whereas in the intro, the last note was an F on the 4th string. Following that, repeated, will then just be a power chord, in this case a G power chord, played with the first finger on the 3rd fret of the 6th string, 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 5th string, and then the 4th finger on the 5th fret of the 4th string. Hit that for 2 quarter notes, and then palm mute eighth notes on the end of the measure. And just repeat as the song fades out. So I'll play the outro a little slower. And that's the outro for Paperback Writer. This is the performance segment of Paperback Writer.
Paperback Writer. Paperback Writer. It's 1,000 pages, give or take a few. I'll be writing more in a week or two. I can make it longer if you like the style. I can change it round, and I wanna be a paperback writer. Paperback writer. If you really like it, you can have the rights. You can make $1 million for you overnight. If you must return it, you can send it here. But I need a break, and I wanna be a paperback writer. Paperback writer. Paperback writer. Paperback writer. Paperback writer. Paperback writer. No matter where you read my book, it took me years to write. Will you take a look? It's based on a novel by a man named Lear, and I need
This is the Guitar 2 verse segment for Paperback Writer. In Guitar 2, the only thing that's going on is these open chords that are being strummed during the verse. They're very simple chords. One is just the open G chord. In this case, we've got the first and second finger down here on the bottom as normal, and then up here hitting the D note and the G note. So that's with the third and fourth finger. So typical G chord fingering, and that's being strummed for 8 bars, and it's just a typical down, down, up, up kind of strum. So that goes on for 8 bars during the verse, and then it'll switch to the C major chord. In this case, I want to keep a G on the top of the chord, so I'm going to keep that there with the fourth finger on the 3rd fret of the 1st string, and then add just a typical C major fingering underneath that. I'll do that for 2 bars. And then as the song goes back to its signature riff, I'll just hit twice back on the G chord. So from the C to the G, that'll look like this. And then I'll let that ring and then rest underneath that signature riff. And that's the verse for Paperback Writer.
Paperback writer. Paperback writer.
This is the Guitar 2 outro segment for Paperback Writer. The outro is just a power chord G that's being held in the other guitar. So for guitar 2, we're just going to strum on the G major chord. And it'll be the same strum as in the verse. And that'll just continue as the song fades out. And that's the outro section. This is the Guitar 2 performance of Paperback Writer by the Beatles.